As you get older, you realize that age is not the real thing that should be biased against. It's curiosity. You can actually learn anything at any age if you're passionate and curious about learning it. And if you're passionate and curious about learning a topic such as AI, and you have the experience and the wisdom to know how to learn and how to process and curate knowledge, you can become extremely powerful.
Welcome back to Seek, Go, Create, the Leadership Journey. To celebrate our 301st episode, we are inviting back one of my favorites, one of the favorites we've had, Silicon Valley veteran, Netflix co-founder, Jim Cook, who was, I think we were just talking before we hit record, one of our first guests, if not the first guest, 5 years ago. Quick intro, Jim brings 30 years of experience bridging the gap between vision and execution for startups. As founder, CEO of Benchboard Executive Coaching and director of the Alliance of CEOs, Jim offers a wealth of knowledge. I love having conversations with Jim. In this episode, we're probably going to speak about insights from the past 5 years, the evolving tech and leadership landscape, possible predictions for the next 5 years. Jim, welcome back to Seek, Go, Create.
Thanks, Tim. This is going to be awesome.
It is going to be awesome. And we are in the middle of kind of an arc. When we were coming up on our 300th, said, you know what? I'm kind of getting tired of doing special stuff every time we hit these, but I think I'd like to revisit. And when I looked at the calendar, it was almost 5 years exactly.
That's correct.
That I had you, and I think you were right around first. And then Mike Baer, who's a longtime buddy of mine that I've done some coaching, consulting with him, and you and I have done some work together. And so you're 301. Mike Baer, who's going to drop next week, is 302, and I'm recording him tomorrow. And I got to tell you, my episode 300 was with probably the most famous guest we've ever had. And
drum roll, please.
I'm going to, with 2 letters, I'm going to tell you who it is. AI. I did a live interview. Well, I've got to clarify here. I actually had it scheduled before I was going to talk to you. We haven't done it. Oddly enough, AI rescheduled on me. So that's kind of weird. Something about ChatGPT said Elon Musk was doing a hostile takeover or something like that. And so, but anyway, I think I'm scheduling that later. So later I know you and I are going to talk a little bit about AI. So that's where we are. 300 was AI, 301 Jim Cook, 302 Mike Baer. And I think if there were 3 episodes that I wanted to package together and tell people, maybe even put it in a time machine or something, these would be them from 2025 to put a stamp on this.
Tim, your AI 300th episode, were you interviewing yourself and doing one of those avatar things? Is this what's going on?
It was just like this, but where you're sitting, Jim, was the live version of ChatGPT, and we were having a conversation just like this.
Nice.
Back, I've got questions. You know, I didn't really train a lot. I've done a few tests on this. Again, we've had it rescheduled. So this is kind of odd that 300 is recorded after 301. So I might ask you later if you've got a question that you want me to ask when I'm interviewing AI. So 5 years ago, we wouldn't even be probably discussing much about AI, would we?
No, AI dropped in November of 2022.
Yeah.
I remember it well. At least it was released. They've been working on AI, otherwise known as machine learning, artificial intelligence, for 30 years. It was all an offshoot of the DeepMind Center out of Google. But everything came to fruition and they finally launched in November 2022. And look at the journey we've been on since.
Ooh, yeah, I do want to circle back. I want us to have an AI conversation because I think it feeds into leadership and business and what's going on. But before we get too far into this, man, catch me up. January of 2020 was when our last episode dropped. And I seems like yesterday, but it also seems like a long, long time ago. What have you been up to since then? I mean, catch me up, get a little bit of family,
Yeah.
a little bit of business,
Yeah.
just
I remember wanting to follow in your footsteps and get into the coaching business. I had one client who had called me up and said, I think you'd be a great coach. It was at a time when coaching went from being this scarlet letter. I call a scarlet letter like, hey, I think you need a coach because you're not doing so well, to kind of what I call the Oprah of coaching. You get a coach and you get a coach and everyone gets a coach and we're handing out coaches in HR. I was starting to get all these calls in around that time because I'm a CFO. I've been a CFO in the Valley for 30 years. I was still an operator. I was still in a job, but nobody knew who to call to be a CFO coach. I took one and then I did your podcast in January 2020. I remember about 30 days later going out to Breckenridge and we saw you and Glory in Breckenridge in mid-February of 2020. And we came back, you left, and about 3 days later, Liz and I were the most sick we've ever been. This is February of 2020. Remember, COVID wasn't actually announced as hitting the US until March, we didn't do the shutdown. Sorry. It was announced, but we didn't shut down the US until March 13th of 2020. I also remember that well. But
which
I'm
was
pretty
a
sure we
Friday,
had it.
which was a Friday, by the way. It was Friday the 13th.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty sure we had it because I could barely breathe and Alyssa could barely breathe. A lot has changed since then. We learned a lot of lessons that the world wasn't going to go away. Zoom came into our being a lot more. We learned how to work from home. I think it showed us how resilient we could be as a people around the world.
One of the things, I was talking to someone recently and I was just kind of looking back and listen, there's so many places we can dive. I'd love for you and I, especially because of your expertise in leadership and that part of the world that you have been in for your career. But I do think with COVID, it was one of the first, what I'll call a catalytic event. It was a catalytic event for even the people that won't admit that it was, because it just changed a lot of stuff. And I think one thing that it did, I'll say this and I'll let you respond, is that now that we're sort of getting away from it, I think it gave people clarity. And when I say people, I mean large groups of people. There used to be some things like 9/11. You and I have memories of that I think people thought about things and different, but then over time, people kind of went back to different things. And here's the thing that I think it gives people clarity on. I'll say this and you can respond. Not necessarily on what they want to do, but I think it really helped people know exactly what they didn't want to do.
There you go.
Like I'm never not, but what's your observation? I mean, is that sort of accurate? Because I still see people trying to figure out what they want to do, but there's a lot of people now that are pretty strong. I don't want to do this. I'm never doing this again.
Well, I think you nailed it. You and I are big students of history. I know we've had lots of conversations about history, and I'm a big student of history, and I like to learn lessons from history. So it reminds me of what many of us in Silicon Valley talk about a lot, which is, crisis events like the dot bomb era or the savings and loan crisis or the 2009 mortgage crisis, COVID. These points in crisis do give people clarity because crisis gives people gives them permission to do what they've always wanted to do, because what do I have to lose? The world might end. And so I think crisis gives people this, well, it's going to be really bad. I may as well try what I'm going to do now because, the world might be different when I wake up tomorrow. And so there's a much bigger fear out there than the roommate in your head fear that usually holds people back from doing what they want to be doing because they might lose their status in society or lose their job. But when you've got a bigger fear, people just gives them permission to try what they haven't tried before. And so you see this kind of Cambrian explosion of innovation right after crisis events, right after the dot bomb era, Web 2.0 came on board and Facebook was developed and Google launched in 2004. Really, I mean, went public 2004, but it launched 2002, right? Right after 2009, you saw the Airbnb and the Uber, and let's try to just couch surf and rent people's homes and sleep on their couch, which was the first version of Airbnb. Let's have the limousines come to you through an app on a mobile phone. What do we have to lose? These were crazy ideas at the time, and most even venture capitalists thought they were crazy. After COVID, we saw this huge explosion of the ability to use Zoom and to work productively. If you look at the history, productivity went through the roof, much to people's surprise. Working from home was actually quite productive, not having to drive, not having to go and spend an hour on the road in traffic each way. So yeah, I think it's been pretty exciting.
Your old company, you were one of the original 6 at Netflix. We probably won't get into that here. We're going to include a link back to our conversation 5 years ago, because we did a deep dive into some of your experience there then. But Netflix, I don't know if the word critical mass would be the right term, but boy, when COVID hit, it seems as if they were in the right place at the right time. I really haven't followed much since then, but what comments do you have about what went on with Netflix during the COVID years?
Well, you could look. So this is for anybody who runs a business, and Netflix was actually, so that, by the way, so when we started Netflix, for the audience's sake, it was 1997, 27 years ago. So it's a much, much different company now. But yeah. Netflix, when you peel behind the scenes, what was going on during COVID was actually quite worrying of losing tremendous amounts of market share. Because if you look back at the history, everyone was at home and glued to their computer. Disney spent billions of dollars on their streaming platform, and Apple spent billions, maybe $100 billion on their Apple TV streaming platform. You had Paramount Plus, you had everybody and their brother saying, we got to get into streaming now. And, they're fighting the big giant Netflix, but Netflix really was fearful they were going to become the blockbuster to Disney or to all these, that they were going to lose market share. And so that's a lesson for anybody who holds a leadership position, and competition just rushes in. This has happened many times in technology. When I was at Mozilla, we held the market share leadership position for 4 years before Google Chrome browser came in. Microsoft held many leadership positions in software before they finally got taken down across their categories. So Netflix thought they were going to be kind of the next Microsoft or the next IBM. But it turns out that if you lean into your business and you produce even more content and you just pay attention to your customers and you make customers happy, then it's what I remember way back to my Intuit days that we coined a term of, this happened at Intuit with Quicken and QuickBooks. Everyone tried to create their accounting software when you're the market leader. And we coined a term called try the rest, and then you'll come back to the best. So I think that's what happened. Everyone had 6 or 7 subscriptions. Some still have 3 or 4. They all tried it and there's not a lot of content here. Or, it's kind of clunky. I can't find my shows. Everyone got brought in to a streaming platform that was lagging up until the time. So now the whole universe got bigger. So competition is good because it creates awareness. So anybody who's dealing with competition in their local small town and someone's coming in, lean in hard, because they're going to bring in your customers, your future customers that you haven't brought in yet. So that's when you have to lean in hard and actually be better than you've ever been. And that's what Netflix did. And then everyone started saying, well, Disney, I'm going to cancel that one at Paramount. And they're going to stay with Netflix. Competition is a customer generating thing if you really frame it right.
Looking back on it, this is my observation. Yours might be a little different. I like the positioning that Netflix had created to be where they were in 2020. And, could they have guessed what was going to happen? No. But to me, that's leadership too, is just being positioned for when those opportunities. I hate to say COVID is an opportunity. Some people would be upset by that, but it was, it was what it was, a situation, an event, whatever. And
let's reframe that, Tim. Let's say change and crisis is always an opportunity.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
life is about change, and you can make choices of crawling in a hole when change hits you or crisis hits you, or you can just come out fighting with your sword and shield up.
Yeah. And I think one of the words I like to use now, I've been communicating it more and more, is the word resilience. And I think that's how I want us to talk about leadership towards the tail end of our conversation, Jim, is what
Nice.
can leaders do to be resilient, to be prepared for the next opportunity, crisis, situation, whatever. But there's a question that's rolling around in my head, and I have to get it out before it disappears. You know what I mean by that?
Oh yeah.
So, one of the things that I love having conversations with you about is the culture, the atmosphere, the bubble, whatever, of Silicon Valley. One of the things that I loved was when you reached out and you hired my wife, Glory, who was, Southern, gray, premature, but gray hair. And you said, I want to bring someone from outside this culture in to be my assistant and help me do what I'm doing. That was a beautiful thing because it also opened the door for me to storm in and say, oh, hey, Jim, I'm here. Let's you and I have a relationship too. But I'd love for you to go back over the last 5 years and talk about what went on in that Silicon Valley. I'm going to use the word bubble because it is somewhat of a bubble. What are some pros and cons about the way Silicon Valley functions and operates that you saw over the last 5 years? And some things that you observed, because I know you reach outside that bubble to keep a fresh mind, but not everyone does. If we look back now, the city of San Francisco has changed tremendously. Some of the politics around that whole region, they haven't changed tremendously, but it's adjusted. Anyway, there's been a lot of
Oh,
things go on.
there's an
I'm going to throw
argument
you.
that the politics have changed pretty tremendously in Silicon Valley.
Woo, yeah, I mean, I listened to an interview, a long form interview with, what's his name from Facebook, and I'm like going, wow, he's bouncing around a little bit. Maybe he's an opportunist. Maybe he is changing his team. But anyway, I don't. It doesn't have to be political, even though that's probably part of it.
Yep.
Talk about that culture over the last 5 years, and I'd love for you to talk about it to people outside the culture that are going, "Well, what do you mean?"
Yeah. So I guess I'll start with Silicon Valley. This is obvious, is a very technical culture, but what does that mean? It means some of the smartest people that you went to school with who, and technical means computers. We call ourselves the nerds and the geeks. We weren't the sports athletes, right? Or the popular people at the dance. These are the people that were game playing. I'm trying not to be too pejorative, but it's not pejorative at all. It's just like people have their different likes. They're a little bit more inside their own head. They're very technical, very smart. And whenever a new technology comes up, like AI, they're the first to use it and they're the first to figure it out. This has produced great things for America, except there's a problem, is that we forget how great, Silicon Valley has been for America. And because this tech community, this community of entrepreneurs don't really pound their chest too much. They just put their heads down and work and create the Googles and the Facebooks. They don't really connect to real people. Probably up through about 2022 or 2023, you could actually feel the backlash outside of California against this tech community. You could actually, if you paid attention, you could feel like they are different than us. They're the elites. It was always they, and there wasn't much of a realization of, yeah, but look how we brought trillions of dollars into the US from Google and Facebook and Apple. And these are the people in the Mag 7 of the stock market that everyone else was investing in. And so it was kind of a double-edged sword. This is my opinion, at least, because the community is still very insular. They are interested in what they're interested in, and they try to put it out to the world, and they stumble over the first three versions. The first three versions of almost any tech, it takes three versions, and we all know this because the technical engineers and the technical people really, for the most part, don't know how to connect with regular people. And so they just assume people can use ChatGPT. They assume that a white box on a screen in 2004 from Google, people are going to figure out what to type in that thing that we now know is a search box. But when we all first saw it, people are like, what do I do with this? We were just barely getting used to the internet, right? And now a white box appears on this page and says, we can get any answer you want. And we just stood there and didn't know what to type. Like Google tried to help, right? Remember when Google tried to help with their little question mark? And they said, oh, all you got to do is a Boolean search. And we're like, well, if you do these characters and your search is better, we're like, what? This is the same company that said, after a while, we're going to produce this thing called a better email called Gmail. And then people started using it. And 8 years later, there was still beta written across the top of this enterprise product. And they're like, oh yeah, we forgot to take the beta off because these, they're not out there talking to their customers a lot. But the successful Silicon Valley companies, actually successful any company, starts with their customer first and builds a product for them. Silicon Valley starts with the product and then tries to find customers. And so it's a long-winded way of saying there's a mindset of not being connected to anybody who's not in that kind of digging for gold all the time. Imagine if you were in the gold rush and everyone around you was digging for gold, some were finding it, some weren't, but you were in this, bubble of everyone's a miner, everybody's got a pick and everybody's got an axe. It's like, and there's a whole country out there that is not digging for gold.
Is some of that, is it jealousy? I mean, I think
I don't think it's jealousy.
Political divide we have sometimes, maybe. No,
I don't think so. I grew up in the Midwest. I think it's just a lack of understanding. When no one talks to you and people are different, right? When people are just viewed as different, then a divide happens. But what's happening now, which is really interesting to me, is people don't change. They just kind of hide for a while. There's stats of like 35 or 40% of what was considered the blue zone of California. San Francisco was pure blue. Like everyone thought it was 98% Democratic and liberal and hippies and free love and, these techies that are just billionaires that don't get us. It turns out about 35 or 40% of all the leaders and even all the techies started coming out of the woodwork when Trump got elected, and they're Republican. Maybe not far right Republican, but they've always been there because that's just how statistics work.
And they were just quiet about it because they could have been, I'll use this term, beaten to a pulp, literally or figuratively, had they communicated about it. That is kind of going on right now.
Yeah, for sure. Because now you see for the first time ever, not to bring too much politics into it, but Elon Musk is being invited into the White House and doing things, and Peter Thiel and so for better or for worse, the techies and some of the smartest techies are being brought in to hopefully fix and introduce some of these technologies in the government. It's going to create a lot of, nobody can argue that the government's not broken. It's very broken, right?
Yeah.
There's no technology, no real technology to speak of. It is probably 20 years behind. So something good is going to come from it, but it's going to be very messy. Silicon Valley was never really invited to a seat at the table in Washington. So for better or for worse, we have some really, really smart people who understand technology, introducing some of these business leading concepts into this place called Washington, D.C. We're going to see what happens from it. I think you need to shake things up. It's 52 card pickup, and then you start sorting the deck out again. But hopefully that psychology shift is changing because, the same people that some people outside of California called elite are like, now they're their heroes. I just find it really interesting.
Yeah.
The same people that thought Elon Musk was evil and driving these new cars, and now he's a hero. This is just human nature, right?
Yeah. And there's a weird thing. Since you brought this up, I did think about this. See, one of the things that I love about the Silicon Valley culture is speed. There is a, speed, and if it's, break things fast, fix them, move on. And one of the things that you and I can say about government is speed is nowhere in their DNA. And one of the things that's fascinating to me, and I'll just mention this and you can say something, then we'll move on. Is at the time of recording this, Elon Musk has a handful of what seem to be brilliant tech guys literally raking some systems over the coals. And there are a lot of people that are against it. A lot of people are for it. Truthfully, I like the thought of it because I would love to know what's going on in government, but I'm kind of a break things and fix them type guy anyway. And that's not a party affiliation, by the way. That's something beyond that. Talk about the speed because I think that what we've got is a new president that's moving at a pretty rapid pace. And I think it's because of people around him like Musk and some others. What are you seeing?
Let me reframe the word speed into something that you and I talk about, and I talk about with my clients a lot. For me, it's less about speed and more about risk, willingness to take risk by going fast. It's okay to fail. Silicon Valley is all about high risk, high reward. That's what the venture capital community is all about. High risk, high reward. Only 2 or 3 out of 10 companies that venture capitalist funds actually make it, and 3 go out of business, and 3 just barely get their money back or lose money for the VCs. But it's those 3 that we hear about. We never hear about the 7. So when you take a ton of risk, the 10x reward you get from 1, 2, or 3 of those companies with 100x returns far outweighs the 7 failures. When Edison created the light bulb, it was 10,000 tries before he found one, right? And so there's a level of risk associated with willingness to take risk. And it's really important to think about this willingness to take risk reaps. The more risk you're willing to take, the more reward you're likely to get. Well, Washington, D.C. is, it's slow. It's slow because it's not willing, in my opinion, not willing to take risks. So to bring all that together, the willingness and the ability to take risks is what Washington, D.C. is facing. And what happens when high risk meets low risk is things break, right? And so we're going to see some breakage. And then when things break, you have to rebuild them. And when things rebuilt, they get built better. One example that people are talking about in Silicon Valley that I'm a huge fan of, because it's not political at all, is putting lots of parts of the government on the blockchain. I'm not talking about Bitcoin. I'm talking about just the technology called blockchain, where we put in a read-only format the transactions that are occurring that are immutable. They can't be changed. It's a distributed ledger. And if you want transparency, Elon Musk just may bring blockchain technology to certain parts of the government and say, you want to know what's going on in the government? Read the blockchain. Now there's software that reads blockchain, so you don't have to read the ones and zeros. It can unpack it and put it on a web page, but you can actually audit along with what's going on in the government. How far are we willing to take that? I think a lot of people want to see, but there's technology that can help, right? Blockchain is secure, can't be changed. Once it's on there, it's on there forever, and you can go see the history. So I think there's a lot of very interesting things that are going to come from taking a lot more risks in the government. Things are going to break, and people are going to get upset when things break, but then they're going to be rebuilt better.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. And I think even if people have different core political beliefs, people that think like you and I do, it's like, you know what? We need to be improving things. We need to be making them better. We need to be maybe breaking some things, adjusting, changing, etc. I was on a social media platform and I was just saying, whether you're for this guy or against this guy, it doesn't matter to me. I am all for the status quo being questioned and asking questions and poking at it a little bit. And someone said, well, if people can't eat while it's going on, I said, listen, people can't eat today. There are people that are not eating today. We need to do better with all of that, but that's not the point. Let's stay on
There's one
task.
thing we know about, Tim, there's one thing we know about technology, right? And there's one thing that's probably unarguable about technology. It has made everyone's lives around the world much more efficient and much more productive, right? Just getting people on the internet. People in Africa have a mobile phone as their before they have a car or a house. Being connected is due to technology. The technology is deflationary. Prices go down. It makes things more efficient and more productive. And AI is just the next version of this. Now we're going to have an influx of technology, which is going to make things more efficient, more productive. It's hard to argue. The only tool the government around the world, especially Washington, D.C., has had to fix anything or to try to improve anything, there's only been one tool they've ever used. It's money. If there's a problem, throw money at it. Money is a very blunt instrument that creates a lot of waste. And so we're going to uncover a lot of waste because instead of throwing money at the problem, we're going to throw technology at the problem and make the inner workings of the government a lot more efficient, a lot more productive, and a lot more transparent.
And you know what I like? I like that may attract a different type of leader into that system. Because, boy, I don't think I want to get off on this topic. I think we have a leadership deficit in a lot of places. You and I can have this conversation all day long.
Yep.
We may want people to listen in, we may not. But definitely, if we are to look at and model some of the leaders that we see in that government system, and it's because it's such a sludge of just quagmire, slow, as we were talking a little bit about earlier, low risk. And then some people get in there and they start profiting and then we can't get them out. I do think it might attract some people if we get a little bit more effective, efficient, more technology. What are your thoughts?
When you were talking and leading up to this question, I was in my head thinking that leadership requires incentives. So the reason why people don't go into Washington, D.C., there's no incentive to do so. In fact, there's a disincentive to do so, right? I can have a lot more impact and make money outside of Washington, D.C. This is what we've seen. The minute that you tell these young people they can make a difference in the world, and this, so people are railing, there's a 19-year-old with a name like inside of Doge, right? It's like, there's some young people going in, following you along around who are really, really smart, who are only doing it because they think they're actually making a difference, and they probably are. But that's what leadership's about, is like, do I have an incentive to do this? Am I going to make a difference? Can I make a difference? Am I incentivized to do so? That's how you attract leadership. But up until now in Washington, D.C., it's been the opposite. There's been no incentive for really smart business people or technologists to go to Washington. In fact, there's been a disincentive because there's not enough money and there's a quagmire of you can't get anything done. So hopefully we attract some young people who can move fast, break things, get things done. I mean, heck, what's the worst that can happen? Our government gets less efficient.
It's hard to imagine what that might look like, right?
I don't think anybody can argue that no matter what happens, it might not get as efficient as fast, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to get worse.
I mean, and that should be a nonpartisan comment, right? Shouldn't people say, oh, no, we want it anyway? Well, let's move on. There's something you brought up right when we started that I went, there's a question there. And I want to dig a little bit. You brought up that when you went from operator and, you were with Intuit, you were with Netflix, you were with Mozilla Firefox for a number of years and other things that I know are in there. But you said that when you decided to move from operator to coach, that it may not have been looked upon by people. But tell me more about how that Silicon Valley culture looks at coaching. And I'm also going to throw a name out here, the name Bill Campbell, that is one of, you interacted with him, you knew him. I only know him because the model that was shared in a book about him is who I perceive myself to be like, not at that level, $1 trillion coach, but talk about coaching in a world, because you almost said it like apologetically, like you were going from CFO to, now I'm going to sort of be a coach. We got a lot of coaches listening in. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, I didn't mean to. So Bill Campbell, just for the record, was my coach, but he wasn't. I worked for him with him at Intuit before that book was written. Yeah, I didn't mean it to be disrespectful to coaches. It was more of how HR departments viewed coaching. Like, this person needs help, we're going to get you a coach. That whole mentality has now changed, because if there's one great thing about Silicon Valley, and there's a lot of great things, but one great thing is this concept of everyone shares their knowledge with everybody. There's this give back culture. There's this pay it forward culture that really I've only seen exist here. I've had lots of conversations in people in LA, New York, in LA, in Hollywood. I wouldn't give my idea of my movie script to anybody. In New York, I wouldn't give my algorithm on how to anybody. It's a secretly guarded secret, right? In Europe, it's much of the same, but in Silicon Valley, there's one thing people need to know about it. The idea is not the hard part. The execution is the hard part. Ideas are a dime a dozen. And everyone wants everyone else to be successful, and they just want to compete on an equal playing field. And in a very interesting way, everyone who's been there for any period of time just shares and gives back. And if you call somebody up, like Bill Campbell, he's no longer with us, but he's passed away, but he'd give you the time of day, and as long as you made the effort. This is a culture in Silicon Valley which is ripe for coaching. And I think Zoom, to bring it all back, COVID brought back this huge vacuum of loneliness. People were in their house. They weren't surrounded by people who they could look up to or talk at the espresso bar at your office. And I think that just exploded this. I need to surround myself with people that are smarter than me. And so I'm going to go get a mentor, go get a coach, companies start paying for it. But what you and I love about coaching is this ability to take all the lessons that we've learned and pay it forward and to give it back. And I write about this in my Coach Playbooks about why I'm doing this, why I'm writing on Substack, and why I'm coaching. Is it really is gratifying to pay it forward to the next generation. And I think if you're really sincere about that as a coach, that's why you do it. It's about impact. It's about the ability to really leverage your knowledge and turn that knowledge into wisdom. I read a great quote. I'm down here in the Baja for a little while, but wisdom is simply shared knowledge. Or I think it's wisdom is simply knowledge shared. If you think about that, wisdom is not a one person thing. Wisdom is a community of people all sharing their knowledge together.
I love the thought of that because it's others focused. It's not us focused, and I think there's a certain degree in our culture of people. I think some of this being changed, maybe COVID helped with this, that if it is to be, it's up to me, hustle culture, et cetera, things like that. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I don't know if it's an age thing or, some situations I've gone through in my life and all that, but I do think that maturity is a word I like to throw around a little bit more. And fortunately or unfortunately, maturity really sometimes does fit with people that are moving along in life, right? I think there was an article in the Wall Street Journal recently that said something about an investor that's focusing on 50 and 60-year-old startup people. But what are you thinking? I mean, you and I think we've got a ton of years ahead of us, but no one would confuse us for, 20 somethings. What's your thought now on people that are moving into our age bracket? I'm at the tail end of boomers. I think I'm a few years ahead of you, but what is your thoughts about age? Maybe, what do you see even in the Valley with age? And what's your thoughts when I make a comment like that?
There's still a pocket. And if you talk about just Silicon Valley, there's always been this age bias, older people age bias, the young techies who are 22, 23, 25, 27 years old. Let's just call it under 30. That cohort definitely has an age bias because they don't trust anybody. How could they know anything about AI if they're over 30? As you get older, you realize that age is not the real thing that should be biased against. It's curiosity. You can actually learn anything at any age if you're passionate and curious about learning it. And if you're passionate and curious about learning a topic such as AI, and you have the experience and the wisdom to know how to learn and how to process and curate knowledge, you can become extremely powerful. For anybody who's in our age group, stay curious, stay in learning mode, because that combined with your maturity and your wisdom can really help the next generation who hasn't become self-aware yet. You don't become self-aware until I think you're over 30, quite frankly. Let me just say that from a person way older than 30. You don't start looking at yourself, and you don't start admitting that you're vulnerable. You stop faking it until you make it. You stop trying to impress people, and you just become real. And when you become real as you get older, people get more comfortable around you. They're not threatened by you. And yet you have all this wisdom and knowledge, as long as you stay curious and you process and curate this knowledge and this wisdom to actually say, have you thought about this? And you pose things in terms of questions, not statements. You don't pound your chest as much. Let's look at every culture in history. Who is the age group in every culture of every historical society that has been revered? And for the most part, it's been the older generation who people would go up to the mountain and ask for their wisdom. Why is that? Because they were safe. They weren't the warriors. They weren't threatening, but they learned a lot throughout their life. So I think these things all come full circle. For any under 30s out there, I would encourage you to definitely reach out to people that are older than you, as long as they are curious and passionate. If they're not, they're stuck in their ways. Yeah, I'm with you. Discard them. But if you could hold a conversation like this with a 40-year-old, a 50-year-old, a 60-year-old, and they are energized, passionate, they're curious, hook your wagon to them, because they are very smart people who can propel your knowledge as an under 30-year-old much faster.
How does Jim Cook stay curious? What is some practical, either day-to-day, week-to-week, how are you staying curious right now?
I read a lot, and I use all the tools of the trade of searching. I scan headlines. When I see a headline that I'm interested in, I use some of these tools, some of these AI tools to say, bring me more, right? It's getting easier to search. It's getting easier to use AI to learn. So I start with asking a ton of questions of myself. What don't I know about this? What do I want to know about it? Where could this apply? I realized I can just ask those questions of the computer. Instead of me trying to figure out where it applies, why don't I get 80% of the answer done for me by asking ChatGPT and speed up my learning process? So I'm thinking what I'm experiencing is that AI is helping me significantly increase my own learning process. But AI can't be curious for me. See, AI is an answer provider. It's not a question provider. So if you're going to be successful in your life, stay curious, keep asking questions. The great news is there's somebody now on the other end of that screen or of your computer that's really, really good at giving answers, but they're not so great at giving questions. And questions come from curiosity, and curiosity just comes from being interested in the subject. You don't have to be interested in every subject, but the ones that you're interested in, write down your next 10 questions and ask the computer. It'll be amazing. It'll be amazing what you learn if you just stay curious and ask questions.
The cool thing about it, and my wife, Glory, we were sitting just this morning with her coffee. And yesterday I spent some time with AI, and on my browser, I almost wish I could share my screen. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. That one might be a semi AI. I've got 5 tools, not counting the one we're recording on that this will then load up to later, that would be in that, large language model, machine AI category. And I told Glory, I said, I would love to just block 60 minutes a day to sit down and just have dialogue. Because for me, it's a brainstorming tool. It's a writing assistant. And you and I are in the same category. I love asking questions. I love it. Do you think we've got a deficit? Yeah, I know you wrote an article on your playbooks recently about asking questions. Do you think we've got a deficit? Do we not train people well how to ask questions? Because
That's it.
I'm
We aren't training people to ask questions first and ask for help, and that needs to change. Hopefully these tools will help us train us to ask better questions. But in school, we're asked to give answers. We're asked to get A pluses and 1600 as our SATs. We're asked to fill in multiple choice questions and to figure out the answer and not ask for help. This is a real problem. Learning how to ask for help in the form of learning how to ask better questions is the way out. Now let's come back to these things that you call tools. I would encourage everyone who's not a techie, which is most people, to every time you hear the word AI, which puts a block up. It's like, well, I don't know anything about that. To change that word in your head to just another tool. All artificial intelligence is, I'd rather we got rid of the word entirely. It's just another piece of software. We don't talk about, I use the PC, right? In the old days, it was PC, it was RAM, it was CPUs, and we used all this language to have techies make themselves seem important. Doctors do it all the time. They come up with Latin words for names instead of telling you what it is. All these people try to put a barrier between their knowledge by separating us with language like AI. All it is a tool to make you more efficient. It's just a better tool. So don't be afraid of a better tool. I think most people in the world, when you hand them a better tool to do something, they're like, this is great. I'm using it. But when it comes to technology, it's like we put this language and we want to artificial intelligence and LLMs and all of this stuff to separate us from, well, I'm never going to be that smart. You just need to ask a question. The software will do it for you. Just think of AI as software. That's all.
One of the things that's interesting, and I love how this is coming together because we brought up earlier the risk, embracing
Profile.
risk that occurs out of Silicon Valley. And then you mentioned just a few minutes ago that to really be curious, you need to just kind of put aside what other people think about you. And I'm sitting here and it's just kind of ringing in my head as you're talking. Those go together. I don't know if you and I, we thinking like models. I don't know if that's a, 3 things on a stool or whatever, but number one, you have to take risk to open up a new tool and ask questions. You have to not really care what other people think about you. Maybe not totally not care, but not let it drive you and not let it be a part of who you are. And then I love that curiosity thing. So you want to mash those together? Risk, not being concerned about other people, which are sort of related, and then being curious.
Well, we'll mash them together into that word that you started with, which is maturity. When you're older with maturity, you realize that you have less years to live. So why not take more risks, right? You start taking a lot of risks as you're young. You get really conservative between the ages of say 30 and 50. And believe it or not, after 50, a lot of people start taking more risks because what do I got to lose? Maturity, that's risk. Maturity, you brought it up, also gets not caring as much as what anybody thinks about you. So if you want to bring together all the things that you've talked about, it's your word, maturity, not mine. It's risk, not caring what people talk about, and asking a lot of questions. I just want to connect with people more. I think being curious creates connection. You can't be keep being curious by yourself on a desert island. That's great, but what am I going to do with it? When you're curious, I think most people are curious because they want to share their knowledge with somebody else. And when you share your knowledge with others because you're curious, you create community wisdom. You create a wisdom across the community.
Well, and you also attract people because people that are also somewhat curious are going to be attracted. That's, I think, where the age thing comes in and coaching and man, it all just kind of comes together here, Jim.
Agreed.
Before we finish up here in a bit, I want to ask you about your playbooks and some of the things you're doing over on Substack and all of that. I'd love, there's a couple of things that I want to ask, and I think I'm going to ask them all at once and then let you just answer it in whatever way you want. First question is, how are you defining success right now? And then I'm going to layer that into what what are you looking at into the future? And you could either do micro, like, hey, here's what's going on with Jim and our family, or you could go macro and say, here's some big picture things that I see. So the two topics are success and the future, and just ready, go.
Yeah. So I currently in my maturity level, I'm defining success as my ability to make an impact across larger groups of people. I'm going to use any tool possible to do that. I'm going to take all of my curiosity, all of my stored knowledge, and try to just pay it forward without caring about what people think. That's why I'm writing coach playbooks and Substack. If I'm curious about something, I'm going to write about it. It's going to probably be in the lens of leadership and scaling operations, which is what I'm good at. But every once in a while, I'll write about AI just because I want to share this knowledge with others. Making an impact across a larger group of people, I'm just on a mission to figure out how to do that. I'm on the very beginning of that. That's what I think success is for me right now. And and in terms of the future, your second question, I can go micro and macro because I've got a 23-year-old and a 20-year-old. So I'll focus on them, teaching them how to ask better questions, teaching them to stay curious, helping to remind them to stay curious so they can improve faster. When I can improve my clients faster, when they can come back and say, you just changed the way I approached my CEO, my board, my peers. I feel like you've just increased my knowledge of how to be an executive. You've just escalated it by 3 years. That's making an impact. That's speed. So that's kind of the macro version of success. But I think looking out 3 to 5 years, just the way my brain works, but I'm going to encourage anybody whose brain works this way, like mine and probably yours, Tim, I know yours. Because if you can stay curious about technology and not think it's above you or it's smarter than you. Yeah. We all learned how to use a computer once upon a time. We all learned how to use software on the computer. We all learned this thing called the internet. Some adopted it slower and now it's a daily part of our lives. We all learned how to use a touchscreen and an iPhone in 2007 before, like, this is never going to work. I need a keyboard. We're learning how to talk to the computer. Learn how to use these tools that we're talking about to make your life better. And then ask yourself, what tool can make it better, right? There's a couple that I'm looking at right now, which I'm just fascinated by. So OpenAI has released 2 particular tools. One is called Operator. I wrote about this a few weeks ago. And the other is called Deep Research. Both are incredible beta versions, 0.1, not even a release version for consumers. They're like, we've got something here. We're just going to share it with the world and we can figure it out together. It kind of works, but expect a lot of bugs. What is Operator? Operator, OpenAI's Operator, is simply a tool that you can attach to a web browser that allows you to have Operator, the software, type the letters on your keyboard. You give it one question, one prompt, and it actually starts operating your browser. I want to research. I'm not sure which mountain bike to buy. Can you go to 5 different websites and bring me back the best prices, the best comparisons? Okay, let's talk about that as an example for Operator. If you use that, we would sit down with our keyboards today without Operator. We'd be on the web on a piece of software for about an hour. We'd have done 20 different searches. We'd click on 10 different links. We'd open up 5 different tabs, get to the 5 things. You'd start opening up different windows and comparing. And you're probably, if you're like me, copying and pasting into a separate notebook to kind of like compare, because it's just kind of the information's there, but it's clunky. What is Operator? One prompt, same thing. I want to buy a mountain bike. Can you go compare 5 of the best sites, 5 of the best models, bring me back everything you can on it? And Operator then starts on your browser and starts typing. You can hands off keyboard, watch it typing, and it actually and it shows you what it's doing. So anything that you're doing with a browser inside of a business, an accounts payable clerk, somebody downloading a CSV file from their bank statement every day, all this inefficiency, even in tech. I got to go to somebody closing their books. I'm going to bring it back to CFO, has to go to their bank. It's a clunky thing. They've got would you like to download your monthly transactions in CSV? Sure. Click here. 10 clicks later, I've got it in an Excel file. It downloads to my download file. I got to open the download. I've got to translate the CSV into a pivot table. I've got to sort it. And so I can actually close my books. What is operator? Hey, go get my bank statement and put it in a pivot table. That's one question. It then does all of those keystrokes for you. Imagine that. Just imagine if you're doing something constantly a lot on your browser, you can ask the computer now to do it for you. And it's just the beginning. So that's operator. Deep research just got announced 4 or 5 days ago. Deep research is operator on steroids. Doesn't necessarily use the browser, but imagine an investment banker, a junior investment banker, trying to write a research report across an industry. Deep research is ask it a question to do deep research on a subject you know nothing about, and it will produce you a professional paper which will blow your mind out. It'll go get every single subject, and it'll keep probing and asking questions and prompting you back. Would you like me to go deeper on, now the computer is working for you. You're not working for the computer. It's asking you, would you like this in a graph? Yes. And it produces your research paper. And I would just encourage people to try it. It's not mystery black box science. It's pretty cool.
I love the thought of all that as, an industrial and systems engineer kind of at my roots. It's like, if you do anything more than once, how can you automate it? How can you, offload it or whatever? And my mind's sitting here going, okay, we're pulling up info for taxes at this time of year. We're doing this. It's like, and again, we're going to come back to the maturity and curiosity that you brought up, Jim, because someone who is risk averse would be going, well, I'm not going to give my keyboard up to anybody. I get it. I had Joshua, my son, Joshua, he took me to the airport last week. I had to fly to Sarasota to meet up with some business people. And we're going along and I look over and there's a Waymo beside me in Phoenix that there's nobody driving it. And I'm like going, I said, you know what? I haven't, where I've been, ridden in one of those. I need to get the app because I need to ride in them. And people are going, oh my gosh, you're going to get in a car that nobody's driving. I go, listen, my son's awesome. He's a great driver, but he's a 30-year-old driver. I'm like going, you know what? I don't see a lot of difference between, and it's better really. Right. So, I mean, I just think there's a mindset, Jim, that we've seen. I think over the last 5 years, I think we've seen adjust some. I'll say this I'm going to pose this as one of my last questions for you, because I think it feeds into leadership. It feeds into business, families, all of these culture, even the church world that I do a lot of work in. I think it feeds into on things for whatever reason. With all that's gone on over the last 5 years, I think it's getting easier and easier to know, because when you and I have these conversations, we're getting excited. Probably no one's listening at this point if they're not. But the people that are shutting down, the people that are not taking risks, the people that are not matured, I'm not talking about age, I think it's going to be harder and harder for us to hang out together. And I want to hang out with them. I like to move them along. What are your thoughts?
These cohorts of people who are high risk takers, low risk takers has always existed way before technology, right?
Yes.
Whether we go back to the Industrial Revolution or airplanes or automobiles, there were always the earliest of adopters and there were always the latest of adopters. And this would always be displayed in the movies as the old guy sitting in his rocking chair saying, now us youngsters don't know what they're doing while the youngsters are off driving their Ferraris, right? Or learning how to surf. What are these people on boards on the waves? People aren't meant to be on the ocean on a board. These people are crazy. So there's always been this cohort of risk takers, early adopters, late adopters. But history has taught us that even the latest of adopters eventually adopt. They want to, they just don't know how to. Their brain's not wired. It's okay. They just come along slower. Right? How many of people that we know that are 85 or 90 years old are carrying a cell phone and they're touching their screen and they figured out how to use an app on their iPhone. Almost all of it. There's very few that are now saying to us, those iPhones are evil. Those mobile devices, I'm never using one of those. There'll be a small percentage of people, right? But for the most part, people just have their different rates of adoption. That's okay. I think you just got to meet people where they are, tone down your excitement a little bit because it turns off the latest of adopters and just bring them along one step at a time because they do actually appreciate you for it and they will thank you for it over time. But if you take the same level of excitement, I've had to learn this, to the latest of adopters, it really turns them off. You've got to tone it down to, instead of being at level 9 on 10, you got it 1 or 2. And take what's the next step they can make.
I think I know the answer to this, Jim, but are you optimistic and excited about the future?
Always. Future, I mean, if you're not, you might as well just go live, as a hermit somewhere. But yeah, future's great.
I think about that some, Glory and I right now are hanging out in a 55 and older community, which is kind of different for us because I don't feel like I'm old enough to be there, but Glory reminds me that, yep, I'm old enough to be here. And a lot of people, their daily thing, there's nothing wrong with this. Okay. I'm not judging this, but to play a few hours of pickleball is it. And there's even some of them now that they're probably looking in at my light and all that going, what are you doing on your computer and all that? I said, well, I've got a podcast. So anyway, I'm optimistic and excited too. Jim, tell me about what you're doing over on Substack. Let everybody know. We're going to include links and maybe give an article for someone to go to first if they haven't, haven't gotten started with you yet.
So I started in June of 2024, taking all the things that I was talking with I have about 12 clients right now. I coach them one-on-one. They are CEOs, CFOs, VPs of finance, predominantly across Silicon Valley, how to scale their startups. So this was born out of my coaching practice. My practice is a bunch of lessons learned, what I call frameworks for going faster, playbooks inside those frameworks to go faster. And I realized that I can take a summary of, I spend 3, 4, 5, 6 sessions at a time with clients going over one of these articles, but I could do a summary of this article and at least get people interested and to want to read more and to hopefully start a community talking about this. An example would be my current series, which is leading with powerful questions. One of the things that you and I have talked about a lot that I really honed and learned at Mozilla was how not to lead with statements, how not to lead with answers. And this ties back to what we're talking about here. It's interesting. You lead with questions. A leadership style is asking more questions, not just curiosity for yourself, but you can actually turn this into a leadership style, especially when you know the answer. We get to a leadership position and the people that are very junior, or even if you're a head of finance or a head of sales or head of engineering, they're going to come to you for an answer. But what you really want them to do is not ask that question in the future. And if you really want that, you want them to learn what you're going to talk about. And if you really want them to learn, you have to engage their brain by asking them a question. Because if you give them the answer, they'll just come back and ask you that question again, and they'll want the answer again and again. And you're not helping yourself or anybody else. If you ask them a question to lead them down the path to enlightenment, it's a very powerful. So this is my 3-part series. I've broken it up into 3 parts. There's several articles like this. Every once in a while, I'll throw in AI. I'll talk about operator or deep research. So I'll talk about other things, but I'm just trying to get a summary of how to think about leadership, scaling operations differently.
You enjoying it?
I am enjoying sharing that info. I will tell you, it is hard to put things down in writing and to make it to my own standards of professionalism.
Are you using some of the tools to help you though?
I've started to.
This is a weird thing here because people say, oh my gosh, but that's what these tools are for, right?
Yeah. I've started to draft something first in my own writing. I asked ChatGPT to look at it and refine it. It does do a much better job of correcting my grammar, correcting my spelling, organizing my thoughts in a much more structured way. But what it doesn't do for me is it gives me the structure, but if I just took what it gave me, it would not be my voice.
Right.
I can tell when someone's written in AI everywhere across it now that I've been using it for a while.
Right.
It has to be my voice. It has to be how I would talk to you, how I would verbalize it. I have to rewrite it. I love the structure it gives me. I love how to think about it. I love the new ideas, but then you spend a lot of time cleaning it up. So it's a cycle.
Yeah. The clue for me, if you see the word delve in anything that I've created, that means I've used AI. Delve, because I do not use that word. And Gloria says, no, that's a real word. I said, not for me. I don't use delve. But anyway, no, and I think there's times for it and times not. Well, I've read them and I agree with you that that 3-part series on asking questions is a great place to start. In fact, what we'll do down in the notes on YouTube and also on the podcast platforms, we will include a link to that and then you can subscribe. And I actually get Jim in my inbox. And Jim, I got to tell you, I don't get a lot in my inbox anymore. I keep it really good and clean. I declutter that. So Jim Cook comes into my inbox once a week with Cook's playbooks.
Cool.
Jim, let's not make this an every 5-year thing. We should probably do this a little more often, I think.
Maybe every 100 episodes.
Something like that. I've
You just got to
actually,
go faster, Tim.
the thing I want to do, I joked with someone recently. I said, you know what? I really do. I envy Joe Rogan that he gets to sit down with someone in a studio for 3.5 hours and just kind of talk. You and I could do that for days. We could do that for days and have what I believe would be incredible content.
If you want to experiment with that, I'm in. Like, I know Joe Rogan smokes cigars. I don't smoke cigars, but I have a feeling he uses up a whiskey every once in a while. So if you feed me some whiskey, I don't know if you do that. Maybe you don't, but
I do.
Yeah, maybe a glass of wine. But if we have a glass of wine, you can get me taught. You won't shut me up for 3 hours.
It would be fun. Jim, tell the family that Gloria and I said hello. I appreciate you being a part of this. And we'll include links down below. We're continuing our 5-year, 300 episode series. Next week will be episode 302 with Mike Baer. He's one of the pioneers of business as mission. He and I did consulting and coaching back in the 90s. And he was about our second or third guest. Make sure you listen in on that. We're going to have a great additional conversation, just like we did here. When we first spoke with Mike, just like with Jim, it was in early 2020. And the world, of course, was on the verge of massive change. He's going to talk about what's happened, how faith-driven business is evolving, and where he sees it heading next. If you're passionate about leadership, mission, and marketplace impact, make sure you tune in. We will see everyone next week on Seek, Go, Create.